Great. Looks like we have a very good attendance. So welcome everybody. Thank you for our city partners and other participants who have already joined, and the few ones arriving as well. So this meeting is our first virtual community meeting that's really focusing on the new linkage center at 1172 Market. And we're co-hosting this meeting, along with, Civic Center CBD, Mid-Market CBD, and the Mid-Market, Business Association and Foundation. I'm Hélène Sotou. I'm a project director for Mid-Market and Civic Center CBDs. A few of my colleagues are here as well. Marlo Sandler is here. Probably have a couple more as well. Hi, Tracy.
Hi there.
I'd like to invite our co-host with a Mid-Market Foundation, Business Association and Foundation to actually introduce themselves and say a few words.
Thank you, Hélène. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see so many familiar faces. I'm Fernando Pujals, Deputy Director with the Mid-Market Business Association and Foundation. I'm joined by my colleagues, Rena Letty and our Executive Director, Steve Gibson. We work to really foster an inviting business environment that works for everyone in the mid-market area. Among the programs we do, we administer a grant that supports the presence of urban alchemy throughout mid-market and the Tenderloin. We're happy to be co-hosting today and providing this opportunity for an information session around the new linkage center at 1172 Market Street. We're joined by DEM, HSH, Department of Public Health, Captain Canning. Good to see you here. And shortly we'll turn it over. We've all been on Zoom quite a bit over the last couple of years, but a reminder to stay on mute. We're gonna allow DEM to do their presentation and then move into a Q&A. We're gonna hold the chat until the presentation's finished in case questions get answered that you would have put into the chat. So it's a big group. We'll do our best to sort of moderate and get through everyone's questions. We've also asked the DEM to return to this group in about a month to have a follow-up meeting as this process is really iterating and changing. We're 2 weeks in, and I imagine it will be different a month from now. So thank you for making the time to be here today and for your participation in the community and obviously your interest. So with that, I'll hand it over to Francis from the Department of Emergency Management. And thank you all to our city partners for being here and presenting today.
All right, thank you, Fernando, and thank you so much to the community benefit districts and the Merchants Association, and most of all, residents and community members that took the time this morning to meet with us, to talk about the Tenderloin Emergency Initiative and the Linkage Center itself. I'm going to get a presentation up and running, but I just wanted to kind of briefly introduce myself. My name is Francis Zamora. I'm an immigrant, a father, a husband, and I go by he, him pronouns, and I live in Bayview here in San Francisco. I'm also the Chief of Staff for the San Francisco Department of Emergency Management, where I've been for 9 years. I focus on, prior to that role, I focused on communications and public information and external affairs. For the Tenderloin Emergency Initiative, I'm what's called the Joint Information Section Chief. And so what that means is that my group is responsible for developing and pushing out information related to the Tenderloin Emergency Initiative. Very similar role we had during COVID-19. So if you're very familiar with the mask up kind of signage and kind of that information that came out, that was my group that was responsible for that. As Fernando mentioned, I'm also joined by Captain Canning from Tenderloin Station, Dr. Deb Bourne from the Department of Public Health, and my colleague Emily Cohen with the Department of Homelessness and Supported Housing. So I'm going to take a quick pause here, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can get this presentation up and running. All right, can everybody see that? All right, and I want to make sure I launch my presentation here. All right. So as I mentioned, here I'm with the Department of Emergency Management. I'm here to talk about the Tenderloin Emergency Initiative, along with the Tenderloin Linkage Center. Just to talk a little bit about the Tenderloin Emergency Initiative, it's San Francisco's multi-phase effort to promote a thriving Tenderloin that will provide more effective connections and services for housed and unhoused San Franciscans, reduce crime, sidewalk hazards, and increase investments in short and long-term neighborhood operations between city and community agencies. And so here you see the general timeline of how things began. We actually started kind of our assessments in mid-November at the direction of the mayor, who really was concerned and heard from many residents about what was going on in the Tenderloin. And so that initiated a lot of conversations with community partners, with city departments to identify, and I can kind of get into these phases, to identify areas of priority and areas of concern. Phase 2 really kicked off on December 17th with the mayor's emergency declaration. This was a 90-day emergency declaration. It was really about streamlining government process. Yes, we wanted to recognize that there were crisis conditions that existed in the Tenderloin neighborhood, but in order to address those conditions, we really had to streamline a lot of government process, which under normal times takes months, if not closer to a year. So the Tenderloin Linkage Center is one great example of that. Had we gone through the normal city process, probably would have taken 6 to 9 months, maybe a year, to get up and running. From the time that we signed the lease, we got the center up and running in about 2 weeks. So you really had an opportunity to make government work a lot faster. The Board of Supervisors ratified the declaration on December 24th, or actually 23rd, 24th, depending on how long you were on the call. And we really just initiated operations from there. So that included operations in the community, but also standing up the Linkage Center. And so January 18th was the first day of the Linkage Center. We'll get into a little bit more about that, and kind of where we're going to go from here. The emergency declaration does run through mid-March. This is a multi-phase process, which I'll get into the next slide to talk about like what happened, where we are now, and what we're going to be doing in the future. And so these are the operational phases. As I mentioned, phase 1, which began in November, was coordinating with city and community stakeholders, assessing the top problems in the neighborhood, and really proposing short and long-term solutions. Phase 2, which began in December with the declaration and runs through mid-March, is about connecting people to services, intervening with street activity, and then addressing infrastructure kind of fixes and maintenance that needs to occur in the community. And then phase 3. This is really long-term. It's sustained operations. It's continued investments to the community. It's street and community activations. It's investments and identification of programs that can continue this work long-term beyond the emergency activation. So I want to talk a little bit about the kind of priority areas that were identified in phase 1, and the strategies in which the city and community partners are addressing them. So the first one, drug dealing and violent crime. The strategy we mapped to this is targeted and strategic disruption and intervention, infrastructure modification and fixes, and street engineering. The next one, lack of shelter and drop-in resources. The strategy here is to have Tenderloin dedicated beds within the system of care, as well as behavioral and mental health support. Open air drug use. The strategy here is a drop-in center, a 24-hour behavioral health reference center, which by and large has become the Linkage Center. It's also same deal with having Tenderloin dedicated beds within the system of care as well. The other priority area is lack of safe passage and accessibility. This is coordination with ambassador programs with existing community organizations. Again, more infrastructure modifications and fixes, and then funding and support for community-based projects. Waste and debris. This is targeted and frequent cleanings. I can tell you that our operations have steadily picked up over the last couple of weeks to address this. Increased trash cans, adjusted trash pickups. The next one is a high level of 911 medical calls. And so this is in coordination with the street wellness team, which has launched this month, and ongoing outreach and alternatives to law enforcement. So we have things like the street crisis response team, which provides for the most part, a non-law enforcement response to people experiencing crisis on the streets. And then illegal vending. And this is providing outreach and engagement in language and coordinated intervention and enforcement. And really, when we're talking about illegal vending, because people often ask, well, why is this a priority area? Oftentimes, the goods that are illegally vended are from kind of the higher profile thefts from retail establishments, or even the lower profile thefts from retail establishments. So we really want to cut off the source so that kind of criminal activity doesn't continue to occur, or really help mitigate against that. I'm going to talk about the Linkage Center here. And in talking about the Linkage Center, I want to talk a little bit about it in terms of what it's intended to do and where we are right now, and then where we're going to go in the future. So the Linkage Center is a low barrier site that really is intended to connect people to services, prevent overdoses, and really address the public drug use, right? And provide people a variety of services. So there's two types of services that we provide at the Linkage Center. We call them Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1, which you see here on the left, really those basic services that address the human need, right? Food and shelter, showers, bathrooms, laundry facility, pet supplies. There's also pop-up COVID vaccine testing, HIV testing, hepatitis testing, which occur on the site as well. That's the very kind of low, the low barrier tier, right? And when I talk about low barrier, it's just that. It's not asking a lot of questions. We do have an intake process that is voluntary. We ask people their name, where they're coming from, what services they're looking to access, as well as whether they're housed or unhoused. And a lot of times, people will either choose to provide that information or not choose. The point is to get them into the door so that they can get the basic care they need to just be human. Then we have Tier 2, which are some of the kind of the more in-depth services. So things like behavioral health care, substance use treatment, shelter and housing, sobering, detox services. Those are all there for people that are ready to engage with them. Now, I can give you some early numbers from the Linkage Center within our first week of operation. We saw 1,180 visitors. That's not unique visitors, that's visitors, a total. Of those total visits, about 499 they wanted to engage in those Tier 2 services, which is great. My colleague Deb Borden is on here. She can talk a little bit more about kind of the treatment and the science behind this, but it really speaks to the need to build trust, build the rapport with people that have experienced trauma or are heavy drug users, and so that they have a place where they can be safe, and then once they have had their basic needs met and there's a level of trust there, they can engage in some of the Tier 2 services that are being provided. This is just the map of where we are. The actual front door is at 1172 Market, but 1170, 1172, it's the same address. We have the entire building. It's 7 levels. Right now, we're using the first level and the outdoor area, which we have kind of fenced off. That limitation is largely due to staffing availability due to COVID. Like every sector, kind of our health providers, our public safety providers, our care providers have also been hit by COVID, and there are staffing limitations. As we get more staffing available and more programs available, we do plan to expand to other floors at this building, and then also expand to 24/7. So right now it is a 7 days a week, 8 to 8 operation. And then the last thing I want to address is who's there right now, right? And so this is a partial list of who's at the Linkage Center. We have Urban Alchemy, who's providing kind of the logistical support, but also the hospitality support. Health Right 360 is a healthcare provider. We have the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, Department of Public Health, Code Tenderloin, who's doing a lot of great outreach, the homeless outreach team, Dignity on Wheels, Adult Probation, who's really providing the linkage to detox, sobriety programs, Project Homeless Connect, Dolores Street, UCSF, the San Francisco Community Health Center, and the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. We urge you to track our progress. And so those are the links there. You can also scan the QR code. I provided this presentation to Fernando and Helene so they can share it with everybody. We post a weekly situation report every Tuesday. So usually it gets up there every Tuesday night. So you can see our progress for the overall initiative, as well as the Linkage Center itself. And then the QR code on the right takes you to the direct page that talks about the Linkage Center. With that, I want to pause. I know that there are probably questions that I'd like to try to address. My colleagues from the police department, public health, and homelessness and supportive housing are here as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and then turn it over to Fernando for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Francis. We'll open it up to the floor. There is a lot, so I'll be toggling around screens just to sort of manage the queue. The chat has been enabled, so you're able to post questions directly into the chat or raise your hand. I don't see hands yet, but don't be shy.
Hi, I have a question.
Go ahead.
The organizations that you listed that would be in the facility as well, what does that look like? Are they renting? Is it like?
Sure. I mean, how are they in the facility? Oftentimes they provide us. There's a level of interest, right? It could be an existing city service provider. It could be someone that is working in the community already that has indicated interest. And so, to my knowledge, there's no cost to operate in the facility. I have not heard that, but I can definitely find out if we're charging rent. But I have not heard that.
So more like they're like service providers or program providers. They're not like, they don't have like a space or an office there.
They actually do.
Okay.
There is space there for a lot of the providers. That's why we as a city lease the entire facility. Right now, like I said, we're limited by staffing. And what I mean by that is being able to safely operate the facility so we can make sure that we're looking after our guests. And so as soon as that staffing becomes more available, we're going to be able to expand, have more space for existing programs and additional programs. Now, some programs aren't on site, right? There are linkages to them, and we refer people to those programs, and if needed, provide kind of that transportation or that linkage. So I want to provide one great example of how this worked in practical matters. Really, on the first day, there was an individual that was living on the streets that was looking to get into residential substance abuse treatment, but had trouble navigating the system on the streets. They came into the Linkage Center. The staff basically troubleshooted with them the different things they needed to do. One of those main things was having a TB test. So they made an appointment with that person got them to clinic, transported them to clinic. And then while the person was awaiting their TB test results, they found a place at a temporary shelter for them. So they didn't have to go back on the streets before their residential treatment bed was ready. Obviously, that is like an ideal scenario, which these linkages occur. Sometimes things are more complex, but the idea is to have the services available in one place so that it makes it just that much kind of easier to be able to access the services without trying to struggle on your own on the streets and go to different city buildings or community service providers. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Francis. I have Scott Walton, then Jim Haas, and then we'll turn to some of the questions in the chat, if that's okay. Go ahead, Scott.
Hi, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I have a couple of questions. One, we were told, I'm at the Orpheum Theater, we were told that this was going to be a temporary 3 to 4 month program, but listening to the call, it sounds as if you're going to be expanding into the entire building. So I'm wondering what the actual expected tenure of this is. And my second question is, how was this particular site determined as the space? I'm on a conversation with many other building owners, especially some of these new apartment buildings up and down Market. Everybody feels this is the moment where mid-market is finally coming back to life. But the first impression now headed from anywhere west of downtown would be seeing what's happening at Civic Center Plaza, UN Plaza, which doesn't really contribute to the rebirth of Market Street.
Scott, thank you for your questions. To address the first one, this is a temporary location. And so the emergency declaration goes for 3 months, but the lease at the 1170 Market goes for 6 months. Now, part of that emergency declaration, really not only addressed contracting and city process, but it also addressed permitting. Now, the kind of intended use of the site, if we were to go back to kind of normal times, right, is not necessarily compatible with the use that it is now. That's the reason why we needed the emergency declaration. And so I can't speak to kind of the long-term viability of this particular site, or whether or not the city will decide to have a similar type of center somewhere else. I think that's something that I think policymakers have to assess and decide. But what I can tell you is that the lease for this site is 6 months. Now, in terms of the site, we wanted somewhere that was accessible to the Tenderloin community, but also had the indoor and outdoor space that could facilitate this type of activity. And so, looking at various sites, 1170, 1172 Market, UN Plaza was the site that met the criteria for that. I will say that we're also, kind of cognizant that we're also neighbors here as well. And so I know we've worked with the police department to address conditions on UN Plaza while we're there, as well as having an increased urban alchemy presence. Especially kind of speaking to the Orpheum Theater, that exit, that BART exit that comes out right outside the theater. We want to make sure that we are mindful of the impact of overall operations in the surrounding area. The other thing I'll add to that is we have daily operational coordination calls. Part of that is identifying hotspots and areas where we need to focus our areas. Now, there are priority areas, but we also understand that there will be places where there will be some displacement that occurs when we focus on those priority areas. And so it's really important for us to kind of stay on top of the situation. That's why we're meeting on a daily basis. Scott, I hope that answers your question.
And before we turn to Jim, I'm going to address a couple of questions in the chat, if you could, Francis. One is regarding how we will share regular updates about what's happening at the Linkage Center. And there's also a question regarding the QR codes. And I'm wondering if you can do double duty and paste those links into the chat. So if we could address those two kind of information sharing questions, and then we'll turn to Jim, and then we'll go back to the chat.
Sure. And I think they're the same question, but how we can get regular updates about the overall Tenderloin Emergency Initiative. I'll paste it in the chat, but I'll tell you the website is sf.gov/Tenderloin Initiative, and I'll put it in the chat. That is the city's landing page for the overall initiative. As I mentioned, we post weekly status reports on on our entire activity, including what's going on in the community, as well as what is taking place at the Linkage Center. I can tell you we post those on Tuesdays. Usually my team gets them Tuesday night, and they're posted after 6 o'clock or so. So if you're looking for them, I would look for them after 6 o'clock on Tuesdays. You know, we are working with our controller's office in the city to have a data dashboard, very similar to what we had during COVID. We are looking to have that accessible resource. Right now, you kind of have to dig into the reports to get the metrics, and we understand that that can be time consuming, which is why we are looking at developing a data dashboard, which we hope to have up and running. And so I am gonna just maybe Fernando, if you can go to the next question, I'll post in the chat the website.
Thank you, Francis. We'll return to the chat in just a minute. There's a couple questions regarding how people access the center and the behavioral health services that are available. There's also a couple questions related specifically to drug dealing and interventions around drug dealing. So before we'll go to those, we'll go to Mr. Haas. Do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I would like a little discussion from the police about what they're doing with drug addicts. In my view, you know, not drug addicts, drug dealers. The dealers are sort of the underlying force behind a lot of the bad activity that happens. You know, we know that a lot of them come from the East Bay. They hang out in packs, and some of the most desperate and saddest looking addicts are, you know, hanging around with them to get the drugs. You know, I know that it's difficult to get rid of them, but they cause such disturbance in the area. I know you've done a pretty good job of clearing them out of UN Plaza, although before the Urban Alchemy people showed up, they were hanging around the entrance to the metro in front of the Orpheum. So can the police talk about what their program is? How, what are the chances of getting more resources, etc.?
Captain Canning, do you want to address that, and then I can add some after that.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Jim, for the question, and I agree with you entirely. I believe there are a couple other similar questions in the chat, so I will do my best to address all of them with my response. That is our priority. Drug dealers are contributing to a significant negative experience in the neighborhood, to put it lightly. There are a couple of things that we do, and a few of them, Francis, I believe you mentioned, what I will frame as a layered response. One thing that I have to be very mindful of are two different things. Our obligation to respond to calls for service, as well as the balance between visibility to deter crime and targeted enforcement to be strategic with the issues that, in my assessment, are causing the most damage to the neighborhood. And so let me respond in kind to all of them. Just for everyone's reference here, a recent assessment of our incoming calls for service just in the Tenderloin, what I am responsible for, is between 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 or so calls for service a week. That's spread across all the different shifts, and they vary in complexity as well as priority. In addition to that, in terms of the narcotics enforcement, I would say roughly 85% of narcotics enforcement, drug dealing arrests, possession for sales arrests occur in my district, in the Tenderloin. So this is my priority. The way that we are dealing with it, and that we'll continue to deal with it to the extent of our capacity, is focus on what we learned from community members as well as our own observations. The areas where there is the most saturation, we utilize a variety of tactics and techniques. It's not really a surprise to anyone, but there's a combination of surveillance operations. There is also the use of undercover officers who will purchase drugs and arrest the drug dealer. There is also the use of high visibility patrols, both in vehicles, on foot, and on bicycle. That combined, as well as layering our other presence-based operations, is what, in my assessment, is going to be the most effective, given the resources that we have, to do two things. One, have strategic enforcement operations, and two, maintain visibility. The things that I hear from the community the most in meetings like this, as well as my own personal community meetings, is what you're sharing is great, but it's not enough, and it doesn't seem to make a difference. And to a certain extent, I agree with that assessment. One thing I have to be mindful of is enforcement action requires a series of administrative obligations and responsibilities for arresting officers to seize and properly book evidence, and then properly book an arrestee, and then document, memorialize all of the actions that went along with that, from taking the body camera to uploading that into the evidence portal and memorializing all of these things. And so in my view, rather than having one large operation that works for 2 hours, it doesn't do any good if the police leave after a 2-hour operation and then we see the problem come back as soon as the officers go back to do all their administrative tasks. So part of the things that we are doing to, as I said before, layer our response is coordinate daily with not only ourselves in the police department, but also our city partners, to try and create as much positive activation in specific areas that are troubled the most, and layer it with a police foot patrol to help reduce crime, a targeted and strategic enforcement operation, as well as not necessarily drug-related arrests, but also operations related to the sale of suspected stolen property, as well as outstanding fugitives. The ecosystem that we're talking about, all of these dynamics are interrelated. So rather than focus on specifically one thing, drug dealing, I'm finding that focusing on all of the issues that are related to this illegal market is going to be impactful, and that will do a couple of things. It'll help us be visible longer. It'll also help us identify and strategically focus on drug dealers that are contributing to this decline. Now, I could share the number of folks that we arrest. I would like to do more, but I'm satisfied that my officers are operating to the extent of their capacity. We also have to have a conversation about alignment with other partners in the criminal justice system. I know that there was a recent study for, I would say, the first 3 quarters of 2021 related to repeat drug dealing arrests in the Tenderloin specific. And the assessment found that the total time in custody on average for these drug dealers was about 4 to 5 days. That document was shared publicly about a month and a half ago. And there are a variety of reasons for this, but I want to make very clear that we are working on a partnership with others in the criminal justice system, because quite frankly, one thing that is a challenge to balance is the frustration from the officers arresting the same people for the same thing in the same place week after week. What's most frustrating, though, is what the community is experiencing. So those are some of the strategies that we are executing on, and sustaining those efforts is going to be what I think is going to contribute to a positive outcome. Thank you for the question.
Captain Canning or Francis, there's a number of related questions regarding BART police and coordination related to this topic. Is there anything additional to share?
Thanks, Fernando. I can say that we do coordinate with the BART Police Department regularly. Some of the comments that I'm seeing, I hear from folks regularly. I do share these issues and concerns with my colleagues on the BART Police Department side, and we do work collaboratively. So that is being done and will continue to happen.
Thank you. Going back into the chat, a question: what's the best way to connect people to the Linkage Center?
Yeah, so the great question. The Linkage Center is a walk-up facility. right? And so no appointment is necessary if you are a guest. You're kind of looking to provide services. So I think we do have outreach flyers, which I can provide to this group. So, if you're interested in referring someone there, you can send them there to the Linkage Center. Again, it's a low barrier site. So, if someone is interested in services, they can come. If someone is in need of an escort, we have community-based organizations that can provide that role, that kind of outreach role. And so, as a follow-up, what I'll do is I'll share the Linkage Center flyer, which is available in multiple languages, so that people can provide that information to folks that are interested. I just want to add on to something that to Captain. I think Captain Canning really talked about the public safety component of this, but really want to talk about how, for the overall initiative, we really have to have a whole community approach. And that means social services, behavioral health services, infrastructure, public safety, community partners. There's a piece to all of this in order for us to address this issue holistically. And law enforcement and public safety is an important component for that. In terms of disrupting violent crime and disrupting drug dealing.
In the chat, we've got about 3 questions related to services at the Linkage Center. One is for a little further explanation on some of the behavioral health services that are being provided and how people are connecting to them. Folks would also like to know, if someone's at the brink of homelessness, are they able to access services at the center? And there's a question regarding, are folks that are involved in drug dealing considered as a population for services at the Linkage Center?
So I'm going to ask my colleague Deb Bourne to address the programs and the linkages at the center. Deb, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, Francis.
Hi, Dr. Bourne.
I don't like to be called doctor, so he's
okay. Hi, Deb.
Hi, everyone. It's such a privilege to be here, and I hope it's a part of some ongoing communication. We love hearing the questions and concerns from the community to understand what we need to do to make the community in the Tenderloin as healthy as possible. So my name's Deb Bourne. I am the Director of Health Policy for people experiencing homelessness and vulnerable populations. I'm actually a family doctor. So I did work in the Tenderloin with a lot of families, and I'm also an addiction specialist. My current role is that I am the incident command. It's very much like COVID, as Francis said, incident commander for the response from the Department of Public Health side. First of all, the site itself is an intervention. So the way that the Department of Public Health has thought about our work here is to make sure that all service coordination we have that is in the Tenderloin is coordinated and impactful. We have many programs there, like Hospitality House, San Francisco AIDS Foundation, many programs, Glide, that have been working and are funded by DPH, and we want them to be able to have the same level of rigor of services that we're creating at the Linkage site. The next is to coordinate all our outreach programs and to ensure that they're connected to all the other services that are going on with outreach. And the Linkage site itself is an intervention and is one part of how we see care happening. And so Francis has heard me talk about neurotransmitters in our brain many, many times, but understanding that creating safe spaces, helping people feel a sense of purpose, and helping them have connection, those 3 prongs, which are WHO, World Health Organization, human rights, in states of creating and addressing trauma, are critical components of how we create interventions. So when humans feel safe, they actually can make changes to address their sense of purpose. And when people have connection and connections that has meaning, then they can actually make changes. So how we look at things in terms of harm reduction is a critical component of treatment. And what harm reduction means is that you can come as you are, wherever you are in your stage of change, and be a part of wholeness for yourself and determine what health is for you. One of the things that is such a heartwarming story for me is that we've had many people that do this work are in recovery. And often when we're in recovery, we can take steps and start picking up again go back to using, or what people used to call relapsing, and then we want them back in the workforce. And we have many people that were my colleagues that are now on the street, and several of those individuals have actually come into the linkage site. That tells me that we've created and starting to create a place where shame is not on the table, and that you can come as you are to start to engage in what level of treatment you want for yourself. So really, when we look at behavioral services and the question, we're looking at what kinds of options are there for people to start to engage in what has been really traditional services. But really understand this linkage center is an intervention, and it is a place where people are finding safety. Fundamental things like showers, laundry, food access, which when people are searching for those, puts them in a very high fight or flight state, are one of the reasons why people can't seek the kinds of services of going into treatment, starting on opiate replacement, et cetera. So we're offering those things as fundamental services to allow people to feel safe. We had a gentleman come back and said, I haven't had a shower 3 days in a row in over 5 years. I feel different, and people are treating me different. So this is why we want all of you to understand that, yes, getting people into indoor treatment and residential treatment is always a goal. Having these kinds of spaces are important. And I loved the question in the chat about, can we do harm reduction for drug dealers? And I think that when we're doing it, moving to that direction, that we need to create safe spaces for people to make healthier choices. I hope that answers a question, just fundamentally what the linkage site is. It's a place for people's brains and bodies to feel safer so they can start to engage in conversations around other options for their treatment. The next thing that I want to talk about is on-site services. So those are the fundamental things. There's on-site services. We have programs like Harm Reduction Therapy Center, Tenderloin that are actually doing low barrier, and Health Right 360, our major partner, that are having low barrier conversations for people that are often called pre-contemplative or not yet sure if they want to stop using. We have conversations about getting people into low barrier opiate replacement, which we call MAT. We have BART that is actually coming on site that are going to start to do navigation to their methadone program, which is not that far. So there are, and then we have other programs that are going to come and start their intakes on site. San Francisco Community Health Center is also doing low barrier counseling. So there's services on site, just like we're offering showers, we're offering some services on site that are very low barrier, and we hope to do telehealth. One of the things, I go on the street still almost every evening to do street medicine work. And we do sometimes, if I'm not available, there's telehealth. And so we're going to be working on telehealth. So if people want to start Suboxone, which is an opiate replacement that you can get at the pharmacy, we're going to be doing more of that. The question about behavioral health treatment services, TAP, which is our major central location for the Department of Public Health, where we refer people for treatment, is a very critical partner in these services. And anyone between 9 and 5 can get referred. We have an off hours after 5 to 8 protocol. So if people are interested in treatment, but that we can't get them in that night, we have a protocol to make sure that we can keep in touch with them. And then Health Right 360, which many of you know, have a lot of programs, and they run one of our most critical programs, which used to be called Social Detox. But it's the opportunity to go into a 7-day treatment detox, which many residential treatment programs require. So most programs that are residential don't let you come in off the street if you haven't had some days of being detoxed or away from drugs. And so getting people into this more social model detox is a critical step in getting people into residential. And so Health Right 360 is on site. They're our major partners, and they've been referring people to that program. So I hope that answered your question and beyond. But I want all of us to start to shift from what we think treatment is. And treatment is creating safe spaces and being humane and creating human spaces. And that is really what's been so powerful. I've been doing this work for over 30 years. I've been working in the Tenderloin as either the medical director at Tom Medell or other services for over 15 years. And I've never seen so many programs come together with the same mission. And whether it's at this spot or others, we can't step back. It's really changed the game. So I've seen so much amazing, use the word magic happen in the last 7 days, and people wanting to go into services that wouldn't have come before. Thank you for the space.
Thank you, Deb.
Thank you, Deb. And if I could just add to that, because I see some of the questions in the chat, what about our programs? What about specific programs for other populations? I know that there are conversations taking place this week about planning for expansion, once the staffing becomes available. some of the things that have been put on the table, yes, I've heard creating a space where people can be creative and express themselves, a space for women, you know, on the floor, a space for transitional age youth, you know, a place for people who are interested in sobriety and abstinence. And so it's certainly some of kind of all of those things are on the table in terms of how we're looking to program and expand the site.
Thank you. I see a hand raised. Forgive me if I butcher your name. Katrine?
Hi, thank you. I'm Katrin Reimuller. I am the acting chief of the main library. And I wanted to step in and first of all, thank everyone who has made this Linkage Center possible. Many of our regular patrons, I believe, are taking advantage of the services. And it's great because we're librarians and we offer wonderful services too, but not these services that people really need. So I want to thank you all for that. And we see a difference in our space, by the way. We're seeing a difference in the space and the use of the space. So again, thank you. I wanted to echo and revisit the issue of the BART entrances. For our staff has been on site running the library since July 2020. So before many other city and government workers. And can be, and I ride BART too, it can be very frightening. And often what I see is that it's happening on the stairwells. And as I go into the station, the BART police are in the station, but not clearing the entrance to the stairwell. So I think, you know, it may be just, there needs to be a little bit of overlap in that engagement with the BART police and the SFPD to help, you know, make that a safer space. I mean, we've had staff pushed. It's a little bit frightening. So, and it can be pretty clogged up. And I'm not saying there's an easy solution to it, but with more city workers coming back on the 14th and hopefully other government workers coming back to engage the Civic Center space and get it livened up, that would be really great if we could help make the commute safer for everyone. So, but thank you again. I think the Linkage Center is fantastic.
Thank you, Katrine. And as Captain Canning mentioned, we do coordinate regularly with at all levels with BART and their police officers, and are very mindful of the surrounding community residents as well as our own staff. I do want to do a shout out to the folks at the library. Deb mentioned, you know, our work on COVID Command. A lot of library staff from across the city we're part of COVID Command, and you were all very instrumental in our efforts to beat that COVID. So thank you so much. I miss them all. I miss working with them, but I'm glad you have them back.
I just want to say we've got the smartest staff in the city and the hardest working. That's my bias.
Thank you. I just want to call attention. Deb has put her email in the chat specifically for program partners at the Linkage Center, arts organizations that are interested in brainstorming ideas or bringing programming to the Linkage Center. Would that go for other social service agencies or other agencies as well, Deb? Would you be
Yes.
the point of contact?
Thank you, Francis. I hope this is okay. I just want to talk about how the Linkage Center and how the Tenderloin response is set up. Right now, DEM, it's an incident command, just like an emergency response. DEM are the point people, so I report up through them. But I am, as the policy person, designing and developing the clinical services. And we do need more help and support for art space creativity. That's part of the second component of purpose. All humans need purpose, and art as a therapeutic tool. And we could use your help. We even getting funding for we're all been shipping in and paying ourselves for the arts supplies. So we really could use some of the best practices as we've had in Hospitality House and other really great programs. So I would be the point person for that. If there are CBOs there that are interested in working, Francis, right now they're still going through DEM, on my understanding. So if there's other kinds of social service programs, if it's a clinical based program, please contact me. But if it's just a general program, I think there's an email, Francis, is there a general that they would need to contact DEM. Currently, the programs that are there are either funded directly through DPH or HSH, or they're programs like probation and HSA.
Thank you. So there are some echoing concerns around general safety, particularly in the transit areas. I think that we've heard that very clearly here on the call. There are also two questions related to housing. One is, if folks, are currently housed but at the brink of homelessness, are they able to access services at the center? And then just some more clarification regarding the process for housing. And then I see a hand raised. Brandon, we'll get to you after those two.
Okay, so yes, definitely housing is one of these services that can be accessed at the Linkage Center, whether you're housed or unhoused. Now, part of the purpose of the site is to be able to troubleshoot and help connect you to services. Now, I cannot speak with certainty on whether or not the program that helps people who are on the brink of homelessness is at the site. But what I can tell you is that the staff is committed to trying to troubleshoot folks the issues that folks have. Now, who can go to the site? The site isn't intended for folks in the Tenderloin, as Deb mentioned, whether they're housed or unhoused. Was there another question, or are we going to Brandon? Sorry, Fernando, if I missed another question.
I don't know if we fully addressed, the process. Someone looking for housing comes into the center. What do they walk through?
Sure. Deb put in the chat that the resource guide for anyone at risk for evictions. Other than talking about how we have, things like Project Homeless Connect and Department of Homeless and Supportive Housing on site, as well as other service providers on the site that can help troubleshoot these issues, I don't have a more specific answer on process. My colleague Emily Cohen, who was on here earlier, but had to go to another meeting. Why don't I take this question offline and try to get a more detailed response to those specific questions in that specific process.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Williams?
Thank you. So I think there's a lot of great services being offered here. But I guess the big concern I have, and it seems it's come up a lot in this conversation about policing and about thinking that the issue, even stopping drug dealers, is a matter of policing. My big concern as an African-American man, San Francisco police don't have a great history with the Black community. I know there's been some efforts to improve that, but I think what this sounds like, and I think even from a lot of activists around the city, that this program sounds like it's going to be more incarceration. Too many times, even in the job that I work, that I've never seen it so vicious. Being from the East Coast, I've never seen it so vicious as it is in San Francisco in terms of school to prison pipeline. And a number of, I think the last study I saw was Black women make up 6% of the population of women in the city, but account for 60% of the arrests. So I don't know if the captain here could speak to something. Like, I want to know, what are the police doing in terms of their own initiatives to make sure that this just doesn't become another campaign of over-policing Black and brown folks? And as you can say, people have made comments in this discussion, like there's clearly an image of, Black people coming from the East Bay and doing all kinds of things or whatever. So I just want to know, as an African-American man in the city, what are you doing? What is the police doing to make sure that this just doesn't become a campaign of over-arrest?
Brandon, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. And it's one that I think is in the back of a lot of folks' minds. So I'll do my best to respond to a very complex question. Quite frankly, our role in this plan is no different than our role is without the plan. We are working to facilitate coordination to address some underlying issues that systemically have led to some of the challenges that we've been experiencing as a society and as a city. Now, what I can tell you is this. One thing that you identified that I feel is the billion-dollar question is one of development, opportunity, and access. And so as we as a police department are focused on a coordinated effort, and that's one thing that I would like to point out that is very, I'm very optimistic about this. Traditionally, our police deployments have been siloed, right? Where we say there is a issue of reported crime in a certain geographic area, and we determine success by metrics like how many arrests have been made. That is certainly not the case in this instance. Now, one thing that I am very, as a person who lived in the Tenderloin up until a few years ago and walked to work, one thing that surprised me as a resident rather than as a police officer was the number of families, children, and people from a variety of countries that come to America and end up in San Francisco and don't have access. And I think these issues that we're discussing and the reason why we have a coordinated response is to address some of those underlying challenges that if individual departments work on them on their own, they might be a talking point for an individual department. And I can speak personally as a police officer 30 years ago, part of the culture was to demonstrate success by sharing numbers. Now, we do need to quantify the work that we do. However, we need to coordinate our responses with other city departments, I think community-based organizations, nonprofits, all geared towards addressing some of these underlying issues that are interrelated. And so that's why I am very optimistic about this plan. I'm not saying that law enforcement won't be a part of it, but it's certainly not the answer, and it needs to be coordinated and sequenced. There needs to be a level of accountability. There also needs to be a level of public safety. And quite frankly, if there is a level of public safety where folks feel safe to engage in the work that they are trained to, I'll be very honest, there are people that are much better at being outreach folks than police officers. We focus on violent crimes and maintaining a degree of, one, a feeling of safety, and two, the ability to follow up on crimes and investigate instances of violent crime so we can hold people accountable for what they did. That's all part of this. So I think allowing us to be a part of this regular briefing with these other partners is going to be the work that is quite frankly required and needs to be sustained for a significant period of time. And I'm committed to doing that. I know the police department is. And as we continue to work together, I think we're going to start chipping away at some of the criticisms that have come our way in law enforcement. This is a way that I'm very excited to work together with a group of my colleagues here to help improve the neighborhood. Thank you for your question.
Well, thank you, everybody. We're coming up towards the end of our time here, coming to 11:30 a.m. I think this has been a very good discussion. I do want to thank everybody who's participated. I want to thank, our certainly our city and CBO partners that took part in this discussion, but also the many staff that are actually working, right now to make this linkage center and a response to the Tenderloin emergency a success. There was a question in the chat about is this going to be a reoccurring meeting? Yes, it will be. We will, set an announcement when the next meeting has been set up, most likely in about a month or so. I just on behalf of a mid-market and Civic Center CBD, again, thank you. And I'd like also to pass it on to our co-host, Steve Gitson, for a few closing remarks as well.
Yeah, I just quickly, because we are out of time, but I'd like to echo the thanks to the DEM and the various departments that are here today and have shared their information with you. I really am appreciative of everybody that has signed into this and participated. A couple of observations before we go. One, it is quite impressive how the city departments and agencies have come together to work on this issue and this problem. We see it firsthand in the daily work. And so I want to thank you to the Department of Emergency Management and their ability to bring the city departments together. And that's been really, really positive. Secondly, I think that everybody heard on this conversation some level of frustration. There is a lot of positive work going on, but unfortunately, it hasn't shown itself that much on the streets yet. And so there's a lot of work yet to do. There's a lot of frustration out in the community. And I think you'll hear about that as we go forward. The ongoing communication is incredibly important. A month from now, but I think you'll see out of the Mid-Market Business Association and Foundation even a higher level of communication to keep this information going to all of you. Again, thank everybody. This has been wonderful, and stay tuned.
Thank you.